Hello, Dreamcatchers, and welcome to another exciting day in the Writer's Haven. I am your host, Helena, and today in studio with me is sci-fi fantasy author Megan Morgan. She's here to talk about her novel, her debut novel, Altered Wake. It is the first in a 4-part series that features shapeshifters and ghouly monsters and swords and battles to the death. And she's here to talk about all of that and more, and we're really excited to have her. So help me in welcoming author Megan Morgan to the Haven. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I am doing wonderfully well. Just glad to finally have you here to talk about your book.
Yeah.
And listen, before we get started, I really do want to talk a little bit about you, the author, and how you came to become a sci-fi fantasy writer.
I've always been super interested in science fiction and fantasy. I grew up in a small town in Fairmont, West Virginia. And everyone in my family was, sort of very conservative and very middle of the road. And then I was the kid who was off watching Star Wars, on repeat. And that's definitely where my obsession started. And as I, consumed all of these science fiction and fantasy books, I noticed that there was this serious lack of engaging female characters. A lot of the times a woman would be there either as a love interest or, as a side character. And I just knew that I needed to write stories that included women in a bigger way. And so that's what I did. Starting in junior high, I started writing my own stories, and they, put the swords in the hands of the women as well as the men. And that's always been a huge motivating factor for me.
You have some amazing female characters in your book, and we're going to talk more about them. So as far as your journey, you started writing when you were younger?
Yes.
And who were some of the authors who influenced your writing at that time and now?
In my early years, I read a ton of the original Nancy Drew books. Those were some of the first, full-length chapter books that I read. So from the very beginning, I was like, yes, let's have these awesome ladies who are, digging in and solving mysteries and all of that kind of stuff. And then later on, I read a lot of the sort of Star Wars novelizations because I grew up in that era, in that gap between Star Wars movies. And there were books. And then, of course, once I was in junior high and high school, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter became, a phenomenon. And at first I was like, I don't want to read that popular stuff that everybody else is reading. I was like, there were kids in my class who didn't read at all, and they were reading Harry Potter. And then one of my friends was like, Megan, you really have to. And then I did. And I, completely fell in love.
She totally smoked you.
Yeah, totally, completely.
So Megan, who's your target audience? I mean, I know that you write fantasy sci-fi, and there's a huge following across age groups, but was there a target audience that you were trying to capture?
My initial audience with my first draft is always myself. I'm always writing to that little girl who so desperately wanted these kinds of characters and these kinds of stories. So come my second draft, my editing, I start really honing in on creating a writing style that is very readable for a broader audience. So I have a tendency to do these really long sentences and use these fancy words and, create these huge metaphors and stuff. And in the second draft, a lot of times I'll go back and I'll clean up a lot of, my sort of literary tendencies and create something that's readable is my primary goal. I've been finding the response to the Altered Wake has been from a really broad range of people, although it sells really well in comic shops and places like that because it has superpowers and stuff like that in it. So it's really suited to that kind of audience that's interested in superpowers and what kind of impact they have on the world. And
there's a powerful cult following for that genre as well. I mean, you know, if you talk about Star Trek and the Trekkies and, you know, that whole world of fantasy and sci-fi. And so this book, was that your intention to really have it received in the same kind of way as you were writing, or is that something that just kind of developed organically as you were writing?
I think that that's definitely an organic thing, primarily because that's what I'm interested in. I'm a total geek. I'm a nerd. I love, you know, that stuff that, you know, people can get so excited about and create these little subcultures around. So yeah, I think that was definitely an organic thing, just because that's what I love.
Okay, so Megan, tell us about your process.
Writers typically fall into two categories. There are people who are plotters and people who are pantsers, meaning that you're flying by the seat of your pants. I am not a plotter, I'm a pantser. And what that means is that usually when I start, I have the characters in mind, and I'll have 3 or 4 really critical scenes that the book is going to be built around, like in my head. And then I start writing, and I just let the characters do what they're going to do. And I'll have certain points throughout that, okay, we kind of need everyone to hit this, you know, point and create this scene, and then I'll sort of let them do what they do after that, and then we'll get to another critical scene that I have in mind, and, you know, make sure that everybody does that. Though, you know, sometimes the characters rebel and they do their own thing, and then all the plans are out the window. So I very much organically follow the characters and learn who they are as I go. And
in the process, we're learning who they are.
Yes, and hopefully what you end up with is a sort of feeling of surprise, because I'm being surprised as I'm writing. And then what that means is that once I get to the end and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened, then I have to go back and I have to edit.
Yeah.
And
the
thing about being a pantser is that editing is a nightmare, but it's a nightmare that I love.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of the editing process, because to me, that's when I get to take everything apart and then I get to put it back together in a way that's really meaningful.
But you're not editing while you're writing.
No, I completely finish
vomit
the
on the
first
page.
draft. Yeah, I
and
get all the way through it, and then I'll go back, I'll read through it, I'll find the narrative strands that work the best, I'll cut everything else out, and then I'll sort of rebuild around that primary narrative that you know is the core strand running through. And the nice thing about that is that it gives me an opportunity to, you know, rewrite some of the scenes and sort of refine the characters and maybe like add some new settings and just sort of strengthen what is there. And I love the editing process. I think I probably cut, after my first draft of The Altered Wake, I cut about 50% of the material that I had.
Oh, wow.
And then rewrote about 5 or 6 chapters, just completely new. And then I was still at an obscenely high word count. So I had to go in and I had to completely cut out one character's perspective and then sort of rewrite a few of the chapters to sort of accommodate the information and stuff that you needed to get through the book.
Wow,
Yeah.
I love your process. I mean, I personally probably would not be able to write that way because I am such a stickler for organization.
Yeah.
But I can appreciate how free falling the story just kind of comes together, because these are characters that you've birthed, so you know them like you're their parents. And like children, they surprise us and do and say things that we don't necessarily think that is within their character.
Yes.
But there's a lot of fun in writing that way.
Yes.
So yeah, I can really appreciate the way that your process flows. Now, it's a 4-book series. Did you start out knowing it was going to be a 4-book series, or did that just kind of happen at some point as you were writing the first book?
That that just happened as I was writing the first book. Definitely when I first started writing, I think I had in mind maybe one or two. And then once I got done with the first one, I'm like, this needs so much more than what I have here. Like, I feel like once I finished this book, I'm like, this is just the beginning of like this huge journey. And so, yeah, that's when I sort of decided definitely it would be 3. And then the more I thought about the material, I'm like, okay, we're going to need 4.
Okay. So when you started writing the series, or let's just stick with the book, and you just sat down and you just thought of these characters and just was inspired to write them. I'm trying to get at what inspired you ultimately to start writing Altered Lake.
I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and I'm one of those people who's constantly telling themselves stories. So I'm always walking around with like 5 or 6 characters doing stuff in the back of my head. And then, sort of scenarios and scenes just kind of gradually come together to make a larger arc. So it's just something that I have always felt like is in some way necessary to me to do. Even if I didn't get published, I would be doing this just because I kind of have to. I don't have any choice. The stories are there, and I can't turn them off.
And I love the way that you wanted to highlight women characters and show strength in women characters. I'm feeling that there was a void in literature for that. So I think that that's awesome.
It's a huge deal to me because growing up, I very much wanted that. I was a little girl who, like, I loved to build Legos and stuff, and I would walk down the toy aisle, and like they were all made for boys, you know what I mean? Like there weren't any girl figurines in any of the Lego sets. It's gotten better, but now they're like, the girl Lego sets are like so girly that I probably wouldn't have liked them either. So like then when I went and read all these books, and I loved Star Wars, and you have Luke Skywalker and you have Princess Leia, who's awesome, but I so desperately wanted like a girl who was a Jedi. It was like such a big deal to me, and like we get that now, which is awesome, but I'm just like, we need more. Like we always do, until it's like 50-50, I'm like, let's keep going.
And I love that you use your artistry to bring that out. Okay, well, let's talk a bit about the publishing aspect of your book. And so you said that when you started out and you thought, well, I'll just self-publish it because it was more important to you to get it out there than it was to look for an agent or to get with a publishing company. But then something very surprising happened. So talk to us about that.
I knew I wanted to self-publish a lot because I wanted to maintain, control of my work, especially since, the female characters are such a motivating aspect of it for me. I wanted to maintain the integrity of my female characters. I had concerns about some things being changed, to sort of fit the usual molds.
You mean like from editors, from the majors looking at it and saying, hey, what about this? Can you change that? And you didn't want to have to deal with that.
I really didn't want someone to come in, and especially like if I got to book 4 and then someone was like, we don't like the way this goes, then I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. We're like on book 4 now, you can't. But they can, once they buy your book, they can tell you what to do. But as I was going through the process of self-publishing, I sent out the book to have the interior formatting done, which is someone picks out the font and, they make sure it is all going to print out nicely, which I had no experience doing whatsoever. And the person who was doing the interior formatting, Ben Farrow, was someone who also has his own small publishing company in Baltimore. And as he was going through it, doing the formatting, he offered to publish me under Clickworks Press. And so I'm still very much an indie author because it's very much an indie publishing company. And I still get to maintain creative control, but I don't have to do a lot of the stuff that I don't like to do, which is super nice.
You mean the things you would have had to do if you were a self-published
Right.
author.
If I had self-published, I would have had to, do like all the setup with Amazon and download all the digital files and make sure everything aligned between Amazon and the printing company. And it's just, there are a lot of little like moving pieces that it's nice to be able to hand that off to someone who has experience doing it. For sure.
That's awesome. So for those of our dream catchers who aren't really familiar with what I've heard you say is the hybrid of publishing, it basically looks like a situation where the publisher is just doing the legwork, the technical legwork. They're taking care of your cover, they're getting the ISBN, they're doing some marketing, but not as much as a vanity publisher would. And then what aspects of that business are you responsible for?
What the model looks like sort of depends on the indie publishing company. Clickworks Press, who I worked with, like I got my own cover design done. So, you know, I still had a lot of control over those things. Like they have certain standards and stuff that they want to be met, which is nice because they sort of, you know, have a certain amount of
their own
branding.
Control.
Exactly. Because one of the disadvantages of self-publishing is there is no quality control whatsoever. So, you know, you're seeing
unless
a lot
you're paying
of stuff.
for it.
Right, exactly. You're seeing a lot of stuff go out that, you know, maybe doesn't look like it would belong on a Barnes and Noble shelf necessarily.
Which is so important, right? Because I mean, I love your cover, but there are some books that don't have that professional looking cover that no one's going to pick it up if they see it on the bookshelf. So that part is so important for self-publishers to get.
They say don't judge a book by its cover, but I mean, a lot of times we do because it's with books, it's very difficult to tell when you're picking it up, you know, what you're getting. And so a cover is all you really have to go on, maybe 150 words on the back of the book. But yeah, what a hybrid publisher does sort of depends on which one you sign up with. But they typically will, you know, do a smaller amount of work than, say, a traditional Big Five publisher would do. So they'll take care of just certain aspects. And then a lot more of the control is in the hands of the author. And where exactly those responsibilities lie is very much going to depend on the publisher and what sort of their process is. I kind of appreciate the fact that I know a lot of the marketing and stuff is up to me, just because it probably would be even with a traditional publisher. I'm not, you know, a big name author at the moment. I'm not going to get a lot of marketing support from a publishing company, even if I did publish traditionally. So sort of going into it knowing that it's on me is kind of an empowering thing. But that's how I feel about it. I don't know that everybody would. So, you know, anytime I talk to another writer, like, you have to find the way that works well for you. For some people, going 100% self-published is the right thing to do because having the responsibility and the control is what they need. For some people, it's going to be the right thing to spend 3 or 4 years, you know, finding an agent and finding a traditional publisher and having those people to guide you through the process so that you don't have to think about it and you can just worry about writing. For me, so far, you know, going the indie hybrid route has been something that I'm comfortable with and that I like.
It works for you.
It
Works for you. And you still just get to focus on the writing and not all of the other things that's really important to it. Now, how does the ebook piece work with your publisher?
My publisher, like, 100% takes care of like the ebook formatting and then making sure it's uploaded to all the places that it needs to be. So yeah, that's another thing.
That's another thing you don't have to worry about.
Exactly. Yes, I don't have to worry about that.
Now, is the ebook out now for this book?
Yes, it's available on like Kindle, like the
e-readers
store, all of the list of, there are like 5 or 6 different ones now that are like bigger ones and then a bunch of smaller ones. And so, yeah, it's available on all of the, you know, bigger names.
Now, have you done any book festival circuits?
I've done like a few signings, and I'll definitely be at the Baltimore Book Festival coming up later in the next fall. I've done a couple of events and stuff. Yeah,
and the reception's been awesome.
Yeah, like those, it's great to get out and like talk to people face to face, and you know, answer people's questions and sort of pitch the book to people. Like it's very challenging at first, but the more I've practiced, the more fun I have doing it, because it's kind of cool when you meet that person who's into what you have and you just see their face light up.
Yeah.
And go, oh wow, that sounds awesome. And I'm like, yeah, you should pick it up.
Well, how many people were upset about you killing Erica?
Everybody.
I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, she made us fall in love with this character. I totally did not see that coming.
Yeah, no, I was pretty sad too, because
she just told you that she needed to die.
Yeah, it was just sort of, you know, like as I was going through it, you know, you're constantly debating with every single character you have as a writer. Okay, like if I had to kill them, like how would I kill them, and like would it work here and would it work there? And then like as I was getting to the end of the book, I was just like, oh man, that's how this is gonna happen, isn't it? And then it did, and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, because she was, you know, a character who in my first couple of drafts, she was there, but I wasn't like hugely fond of her. And then in like, I think the third draft, like something happened and like I completely fell in love, and I'm like,
yeah.
But then she died.
And then it was Cameron that killed her, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a really.
I don't want to tell
moment.
too much of the story. Have people go out to get it. Now, Megan, what advice would you give to an author who is interested in writing fantasy, sci-fi fiction?
For anyone who writes, like, just you have to read a ton, and you have to write a ton, and you have to write a ton of stuff that's really terrible, and it's totally okay. Everybody does. And especially if you're writing sci-fi and fantasy, you know, read within that genre. Find out what the conventions are. Make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, doing something that someone else has already done. And especially in sci-fi and fantasy, the interesting thing about both of those genres is that at their very best, they are simultaneously escapism as well as providing commentary on the world that we actually live in. And that's what I've always loved about those genres, is that you're being entertained by, like, you know, swords and spaceships and, you know, all of these cool things that are happening in these worlds that aren't your world. So, you know, there's like low stress. But then you put it down and you go, oh, wait a minute. Like, this lines up with what is really happening in our world.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're genres that need to be approached like thoughtfully, but at the same time, and I would say this to anyone writing in any genre, like, don't try too hard. A lot of the commentary that I think comes out in my writing is usually stuff that it's just stuff that I'm constantly thinking about in the back of my mind to begin with. It's not something that, like, I'm trying to do. It's just something that happens. So, you know, a lot of the focus on female characters and stuff, it's not something that I'm like, you know, I don't march into the book going, all right, now I'm going to write, you know, like this female character doing this super awesome thing, and, you know, I'm going to, you know, bring in these male characters who are very cool, but like are also, you know, sort of flips on what you would usually see from male characters in a book like this. I don't write, like, you know, marching in with like a goal or something like that. It's just something that happens because that's what I like, and that's what I see, and that's what I'm bringing to the table. So it's a very organic process.
Okay, so for those authors that are looking at writing in this genre, you want them to, you're saying they should have fun while they're doing it.
Yes, have fun.
And then not get too serious about the message.
Right. Yeah, like be honest. I think is always, you know, a really good policy. And when they say, write what you know, like in sci-fi and fantasy, you're like, but I'm writing about elves.
Right, right.
But I think that the underlying...
And that's the challenge that I often, I mean, I'm sitting in because I'm fascinated by the genre. I mean, I personally don't think that I could write in that genre, but it is such an intriguing and interesting thing. And you have to wonder about what's going on in the minds of those folks who are, because you have to be extremely creative to come up with the storylines, because they're out of this world. You know, it's, for the most part, it's not necessarily things that are that you can relate to here, but at the same time you can, because as you said, the messages that you're getting through are very much applicable to the world we live in. It's just, you know, instead of it being a person, it might be an elf, or it might be Chewbacca or somebody like that, but the message is still the same. And also the relationships between characters we can relate to, and which is probably why I really started connecting with Erica before you killed her. But I'm not going to get on you anymore about that. It's a great read, and I really thank you for really putting yourself out there, because, you know, as writers, you know, we're sharing our inner self with other people.
Definitely, as I was writing, I noticed, like, within certain relationships, I'm like, oh, that's like the relationship that I have with my sister. Or the character William Harfield, actually, who's, you know, he's a scientist. He has this sort of, like, very anxious personality, and I find that that's very much something that comes from me. So of all the characters, I find that in those little ways, he's the easiest for me to relate to. And then Cameron, who's like the main character, is someone who I usually approach writing her. Anytime she's confronted with a situation, like, okay, what would I do? And then she would usually do the opposite. So she is very unlike me in a lot of ways. And so for me, she's a lot of fun to write. I very much enjoy like following her as a character. And she gets more complicated and interesting as she goes.
And Dreamcatchers, thank you for joining us. Tune in on our channels on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Sonos, Alexa, and subscribe so you'll never miss a show. So thank you for joining us, and until next time, catch fire on purpose. The Writers Haven Show was created to showcase the passion, process, and projects of writers of literature, television, and film. Stream our shows on iHeartRadio, Spreaker, iTunes, Sonos, SoundCloud, Spotify, Alexa, and YouTube. We drop new episodes every week, so subscribe and never miss a show. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr at Author V. Helena, and visit our website at www.writershavenshow.com. See you in the Haven, and until next time, catch fire